We are here with a preview of Wormwood. This is a LCG style lane battler card game that has some nuances that are going to be reminiscent to something like Netrunner for sure.
Yeah, with a few twists along the way. One of those big twists being this game plays up to 4 players, and while it can be played at 2, they actually very heavily emphasize that it plays great at 3, and they even recommend playing it at 4 players. And it is a lane battler, card battler, like David said, but it is a more of the LCG model. The idea that when you get the game, you're getting everything you need to play in one box, which, yes, is a variety of self-contained decks.
Yeah.
So this game comes with pre-constructed decks. Now, there are some rules and there's some variants where you can maybe mix and match some cards. If you want to go that route, I think a lot of the joy in a game like this is experiencing these different decks, what they do, how they operate, the different combos that you're going to find in these decks, because they are like very unique. And if you couldn't tell from just looking at the game, they're all kind of based around this sci-fi theme. You've crash landed on this new planet. Your arc has, sent people out generation after generation, and those generations of people have kind of formed their own societies over time. And then, hundreds of years later, you have these 10 unique factions all battling over the remains of the arc that brought you here.
Yeah, and as you can see, we have a game set up here kind of in progress. It's not at the beginning. It's not quite at the end. These are the 2 factions that we used. I was the Windwalker clan. You were the Utopian Remnant. But we went ahead and put all of these out here so you could see the other ones. There's a bunch of all of these are full decks of cards. And I have to say, that is the kind of thing that appeals to me, not a deck builder. I don't like doing all the deck building. So knowing that I can just pick one and go, I think it's a very refreshing perspective. Other games have done that, of course, but it doesn't necessitate really digging into the game as a lifestyle.
No, you can just pick up a deck and play it and get really good with that one deck, or you can kind of experience all the others.
Yeah.
I think there's something like 6 are going to be in the starter set, and then they have some expansion stuff planned for a total of 10. But all that aside, let's talk about what you're actually doing in the game. Now, we mentioned that this is a card game, and we've got it all set up here in front of us. There's a variety of different stages that you might be looking at, or different piles of cards. So every deck is composed of 2 or 3 really things. There is the deck itself. You have your specific faction card, and then everybody has a citadel. These cards are the only thing that start in play. And then as you play the game, you're going to be adding units in front of these different lanes. You're going to be playing what are called facilities that are giving you like ongoing abilities. And you have this on the right side that is the forge. And this forge is kind of the key part of the game, is managing this forge.
Yeah, every card you're going to be putting into play, save one, which is a reflex card, the units and the facilities colony cards are going to always start over here, face down. This is where some of the bluffing comes in, because there are some other cards mixed into your decks that are echoes. These are the points of the game. You're trying to race to see who can get, in a 3 or 4 player game, 10, in a 2-player game, 12 of those. So they're going to be mixed in, but you're going to build any units face down there, putting some of these talent citizens on there so that you can slowly, over the course of a few rounds, get them to the point where they can be built once you get the value on the other side of the card. Or maybe it's an echo over there. Echoes can be actually stolen, not only from there in the forge, but also your hand. So you want to try to get your echoes out there in a sneaky fashion, hopefully throwing your opponents off of the trail, getting them forged, built, and added to your sort of echo pile here, which is your points.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of cycle that you have to do here, and it all revolves around this citizen system, which is right here. You see this pile of citizens called the Creech. This is where you're drawing people from to kind of fuel your society. They come in 2 sides, a gold side, which are called talents that David just referenced, and a gray side, which are called drones. You're only going to get a few of these every turn. You start by getting 2 gold talents every round that you can spend. And if you look at the back of these forge cards, this is actually almost like a little clock that's ticking up. And every one of these forge cards is going to have a value. Once you have forged to that value, then you can actually flip the card and place it where it would go. If it's a facility, it sits off to the side. If it's a unit, it comes into play. If it's an upgrade, it goes on to something else in play. Or if it's an echo, it just goes right into your score pile. Now, managing this, it's key, because you're only getting a few of these every round, like I said, and you can actually flip them from their gold to their gray side to kind of speed up some of this forge process. but then you're losing those gold ones for the rest of the game. It's not really easy to flip them back. Once they're flipped over to the drone side, then they become health for your units. Every time you build a unit in the forge, you have to assign health. So you really have to manage this pile in a smart way to win the game.
Yeah, it's really interesting. For instance, this Musk Herder card right here, once I forged it, it came out. And then I can put up to 4 of the gray citizens, the drones, on it to serve as its health. It's effectively the citizens that are manning that thing.
Right.
I could just put 1 on there. But I put 4 on there, and that's going to come into play during combat, which is a significant part of the game as well.
Yeah, and this is where you're going to see shades of Netrunner. And we talked about those echoes. This is like remnants of lost technology from the Ark. Everyone's fighting over these echoes, and they can be in 2 places. They can either be in your hand, waiting to be forged, or you can have them out in your forge. And this is where a bluffing element comes into the game for sure, because echoes only need 2 value. They only need to be forged twice to be played. However, you can keep them going. You can choose not to reveal them. You can try to trick your opponent into like thinking maybe that you don't have a bunch of echoes hiding over there in the forge. Because when you are dealing damage or when you're fighting your opponent, you're either attacking their hand or their forge pile. And again, this is where David referenced that like Netrunner inspiration a little bit. You're either attacking one lane that protects the hand or one lane that protects the forge. If you manage to get through the gauntlet and actually deal damage, there's no actual like damage done, but you get to look at that many cards either in the player's hand or in their forge pile, and you get to score and steal the echoes that they had prepared. So you really don't want to keep too many echoes in your hand if they attack your hand, but you really don't want to put too many echoes in your forge because they might attack your forge. So it's another thing you're balancing the entire game.
Absolutely, but this is really where that bluffing comes in, because you can do things like Brian alluded to. You can overforge some of these by moving the talent up even further than it needs to be. All the echoes are 2, so if there's cards over here that are at 3 and 4, the other player might think they're not. Now, once they're generally up to 2, you're going to want to score them as quickly as possible. But one interesting thing about the echoes is if you accelerate them on the turn that you play them, you can't also flip the echoes.
You can never flip an echo the turn that it comes in that you first played it, but other cards you can. So you can get some of these low value things. You can place one out and accelerate it a couple times and get a unit out right when you need it. Not to mention that David mentioned those reflex cards that you can play that are like instant effects that can interfere with combat, because combat is kind of the core of the game. You're building up either as an attacking lane or a defending lane, however you want to play more defensively. Some of these decks, want you to play very aggressive. Some of them maybe want you to turtle up a little bit, but you can play up to 3 cards to each lane. And when you battle, you're battling one of your lanes against one of your opponent's lanes. And there's this really interesting almost conveyor belt system where your attackers go down the line. And so your attacker is going to attack each thing it passes, but the defender is going to attack each thing that goes by it. So you're dealing damage back and forth, with the defender's goal being to kill every attacking unit before it reaches your hand or your forge, where your whole goal is to kill all the defenders so that you can start looking at their hand. It's a very interesting, I think, unique system that really causes you to think about the positioning of your guys in your line for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to use a really weird analogy to try to explain it. Have you ever seen 2 teams after a sporting event shake hands? The line's going across them, except instead of shaking hands, they're attacking each other as they go along the way. And then those players or those cards that will get through all of those opposing cards will then, like Ryan said, attack either this side or this side, looking at either the forge or the player's hand.
Yeah, and of course the mechanics in the game support that kind of combat, but there's also the whole table element at play here, especially in a 3 and 4 player game. You can only ever directly attack the player to your left or right. So you're never going to get the player across from you in a 4-player game. So there's that level of table discussion. But then there's that whole bluffing element as well. We mentioned the bluff of okay, I can throw some cards out of my forge and hope you don't think they're echoes. I could keep a hand full of echoes. You'd think he's never going to keep a handful of echoes. Maybe I did. But also there's the bluffing of playing your units. You might really heavily defend your hand, trying to make them think, oh, if he's defending his hand,
he must have some
echoes in there, when really all my echoes in the forge completely, open. But you're trying to get into players' heads and try to get, think about what they might do. There's a lot of depth and strategy just in the gameplay before you start adding in all of the various things that these decks can do.
Yeah, you can also take a look at what the other player has going on. You could safely put echoes out if you think they're at least a round away from having
Sure.
any units out.
Yeah, but there's always that surprise unit that pops out.
Exactly. A lot of things can happen, and those reflex cards also kind of keep things a little spicy too.
For sure. So the game is going to go back and forth. Each player kind of does their whole thing, and there's, as a typical card game, there's a variety of steps. There's an upkeep phase,
Very easy to follow.
a forge phase, your action phase, your draw phase. All of that is happening in a row. You're just going back and forth until one player has those 10 echoes. Once you've scored an echo, either by forging it yourself or by stealing it from your opponent, it is safe.
Yeah.
So there isn't really something that's going to like prolong this game as people keep stealing.
As far as we know, we haven't played all of the
Well, no, it
factions.
even actually says in the rule
Oh,
book
okay.
that echoes scored are always safe. So that's the only in-game goal. You're not whittling down HP or doing damage. You're trying to hunt for these echoes in your opponent's forge pile or their hand. It leads to, like I said earlier, a lot of very tense moments, a lot of guessing games, and really a lot of like trying to play up the synergies of your particular deck in order to excel at that.
Yeah, there's also a lot of gathering of information. Like we alluded to, you might look at a hand or look at some of the forge and get echoes, but you're also getting information
That's
about
true.
the cards that they're forging and the cards in their hand. So there's actually a fair amount of strategy. Now, I wouldn't recommend anyone just pore over those cards when you're looking at them.
Sure.
You got to glance at them. And
You got to keep the game going.
yeah, you got to keep the game going.
Yeah, but it does kind of indicate, like if you, like you said earlier, if you look at somebody's forge and some of these values go up to like 7 or even 9.
They're big, beefy cards.
Big, beefy cards. You know that they're at 2 and it has to get up to 9. That clock has to tick all the way to the end. You know you've probably got some time.
Right.
Of course, anything can happen. Like we said, there's some cards, like I had one that gives you even more of those talents every turn, so you can accelerate even more cards. Every one of these factions has their own strategies. So yeah, this is definitely a game that you're going to want to jump into and kind of learn over time and just probably get better, hopefully at least get better and better and better as you learn all those different systems.
You hopefully want to
Yeah.
get better. And if you want to learn more about the game, check out their campaign and also let us know what you think in the comments below. If you have any questions at all, get down there. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.